It begins as a sound you cannot place. Not the wind, too deliberate. Not an animal, too measured. Not even human, at least not in the way you remember human voices to be. It moves through the air like something both inside and outside your head, carrying a weight of meaning you cannot quite understand. At first, it's faint, a single, frayed thread of tone weaving through the cold rural night. But the longer you listen, the more it pulls at you, as if the sound knows you, as if it has been waiting. You slow your step without realizing. You look over your shoulder and swear it came from behind you, yet every direction feels wrong, like the air itself is folding. People who grew up here swear they've known this voice since childhood, though no one can agree on when they first heard it. They recall it out of sequence, an echo before the event, a voice before the mouth, a prophecy before the birth. The details shift like dream fragments, but one thing never changes. When the voice comes, something happens soon after. Something no one will speak about in daylight. If you search hard enough, you'll find brittle clippings in forgotten archives. Local papers from 1962, printed on yellowed newsprint that smells faintly of dust and mildew. The stories are short, almost reluctant, describing spontaneous infant sightings in villages where no births had been recorded for months. No parents came forward. No witnesses stayed long in conversation. The journalists wrote like people trying to step lightly around a hole in the floor, hoping it wouldn't widen. Decades later, under the slow, grinding gears of bureaucracy, fragments of government documents would be released under FOIA requests. Most were gutted, thick black ink choking entire pages. But in the few sentences that survived, there were mentions of targeted rural audio trials conducted near these same villages, experiments involving predictive frequency mapping. No explanation followed. The transcripts break off mid-sentence, like the recorder was stopped abruptly. Names and coordinates vanish under the censor's pen. The last person to try and truly capture the sound was a traveling folklorist named Miriam K. She came with a battered reel-to-reel recorder and a habit of asking the wrong questions for too long. She told neighbors she was close to getting it, the purest version of the Whishdom chant. Then she disappeared. Her apartment was found locked from the inside, table set for one, half a cup of tea still warm. On her desk sat the recorder, still spooled with tape. In her handwriting, scrawled in uneven lines across the label, "Do not play after sunset." Those who've dared to listen, a farmer's son on a dare, a night watchman alone in his booth, a boy hiding in his father's barn, all describe the same wrongness. They say the chant isn't just heard, it's felt, pressing against the skin like static electricity. And beneath the voice, faint but undeniable, is a ticking. Not random, not hurried, perfectly steady. The mechanical heartbeat of something counting down. But here is the impossibility. No clock in these villages has ticked for decades. Long ago, the last mechanical clocks were replaced by silent, digital displays. The sound should not exist. And yet, it persists. In the tape, in the wind, in the folds of your own memory if you listen closely enough. You start to wonder if the ticking isn't measuring seconds at all. Maybe it's counting something else. Something you can't see coming. Something that has already begun. Snow was falling that night, the heavy kind that swallows sound, blanketing the world in a silence so complete it feels intentional. Inside the rural clinic, the lights in the east wing burned as usual, but the west wing, an older, unlit corridor few ever walked, was dark. According to the official ledger, a child was born there on a winter night in 1987. But no cries were heard. No blood was found. No one remembers seeing the mother arrive or leave. The attending nurse was never seen again. The only living witness, a custodian who swears he was sweeping the hall, told police he heard something, not crying, not speaking, but learning to speak, backwards. The surviving staff tell a fractured story. Some recall the night in uncanny detail, the flicker of a single emergency bulb, the smell of something metallic in the air, the way the hallway seemed to bend. Others insist they weren't even employed then, though their signatures appear in payroll records for that month. The clinic's medical ledger contains an entry for viable subject, Whishdom classification, with no patient file, no photographs, and no discharge record. The pen strokes are precise, the ink fresh, but the initials beneath the entry belonged to no registered doctor. The security cameras should have seen everything. But the corridor's footage skips forward, cleanly, without static or error, exactly 22 minutes ahead, a gap that aligns perfectly with the time the ledger claims the birth occurred. It's not missing frames, it's as though the camera never existed for that window in time. In those missing minutes, something came into the world without being seen, recorded, or perhaps even allowed to be. That same night, miles away, farmers woke to find their cattle and sheep moving in perfect, unbroken circles until dawn, their hooves carving rings into frozen earth. Dogs refused to enter barns. Horses stood rigid, staring toward the hills, ears pinned flat against their skulls. When morning came, the animals dispersed, and the circles in the fields filled with snow. But nothing grew there the following spring. There's a rumor whispered among certain researchers that the date matches one from an incident in a city hospital nearly 300 miles away. A psychological experiment, officially deemed a failure, ended abruptly when subjects began speaking in mirrored syllables, eyes tracking something behind the observer. The timing is precise, down to the minute. Whatever was born in that unlit wing in 1987 may not have been the first, but it may have been the one they could not control. It was supposed to be an ordinary September evening, the air warm enough for windows to stay open, the sky clear enough for farmers to finish their work by the fading light. But at 7:14 p.m., without warning, the horizon shifted into something impossible. The blue dissolved. The clouds seemed to retreat. And then the crimson came, not like a sunset, but like a wound spreading overhead, thick and luminous, staining the entire sky. Across 3 counties, people felt it before they understood it. Farmers dropped tools mid-stride and muttered prayers to no one in particular. Children slammed shutters, hiding their faces from the windows. Dogs curled low to the ground and refused to move. In a government building just outside the affected zone, blacked-out curtains sealed the view from inside. Behind those windows, a table stretched the length of the room, papers stacked in precise, geometric piles. 12 chairs, each occupied. No recording devices. No aids. Only the scratching of pens across thick, watermarked paper. Witnesses say the room's lights dimmed once during the meeting, just for a breath, before returning. No one has seen the document since. And yet, in the months that followed, whispers began circulating. Whishdom was no longer just folklore. It had been assigned a code name, a protocol designation that came with rules, boundaries, and consequences. Years later, a leaked memo surfaced, stripped of dates, signatures, and letterhead. Just one line remained intact. Protocol W-22 initiated. Containment threshold exceeded. The leak was dismissed publicly as an elaborate hoax, but those who worked in certain branches of government recognized the phrasing. It was the language of emergencies that never make the news. That night, amateur astronomers across the counties tried to document the Crimson event. Cameras failed. Spectrographs froze mid-readout. Radio signals dissolved into empty static, as though something had consumed the data before it could exist. In observatories and garages alike, screens went black in unison. A handful of witnesses claimed to see human shapes standing on the ridge lines, motionless, perfectly still, facing away from the red sky. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The next time the witnesses looked, the figures were simply gone, without the sound of footsteps or retreat. The morning after, the entire maternity ward of a regional hospital was emptied. Cribs, for stands, monitors, all still there, but no staff, no infants, no paperwork. The evacuation was never mentioned in any public record. In the years since, researchers chasing the threads of that night have spoken of an alleged pact, one involving non-human cooperation. The supposed treaty draft vanished from national archives, replaced with a blank placeholder file. Only one remnant survives, scribbled in the margin of an unrelated agricultural report. Red sky equals first contact confirmed. Whishdom parameters accepted. It begins quietly, like the faintest scratch against the inside of your skull. At first, you dismiss it as a passing daydream, an image with no weight, no context. You are holding a child. The heat of its body seeps into your arms, its heartbeat pressed lightly against your chest. Your fingers curl instinctively around its hand, and the child responds, 3 slow squeezes, as though answering a question you haven't asked. You know its name, but not how you learned it. And yet, when you try to place the moment in your life, you find only a void. You've never had a child. You've never stood in that room. And the room itself, it is wrong in ways you can't articulate. The paint on the walls is a shade you've never seen before, not just in your home, but anywhere. The air is unnaturally still, carrying a sweetness at the edge of decay, like burnt honey cooling in a darkened kitchen. And then there are the eyes. The eyes do not belong to anything born here. The color shifts if you look too long, as though refracting a light source that isn't present. In the moment you meet them, your stomach tightens. The sensation is primal, the kind of instinct you don't reason with, the kind that makes you want to set the child down and back away without turning your back. But you can't move. You can only watch as the child tilts its head in slow, unnatural increments, gaze locked on you as if studying your shape against the air. When the psychologists arrived, they called it memory bleed. Their language was clinical, designed to flatten the dread into something manageable. But privately, in the margins of their notes, they admitted the truth. This wasn't one patient's isolated delusion. It was a pattern, dozens, then hundreds, of individuals describing the same moment in perfect, uncanny detail. People who had never met, living hundreds of miles apart, were describing the same room, the same scent, the same small weight in their arms, and always, the same eyes. The government files that eventually surfaced through FOIA requests hinted at something far older than the term memory bleed. In faded type, the documents described trials in transferred maternal imprint, where fear itself was the variable understudy. They wanted to know if terror could be passed down as easily as blood type. Most of the pages were blacked out, but one phrase survived unmarked: Whishdom retention parameters. Someone had circled it 3 times as if to make sure the next reader didn't miss it. The strangest element isn't the memory itself, it's the recognition. Survivors of the bleed speak of locking eyes with strangers on the street, only to feel that sudden, cold certainty: I've stood beside you in the birth room. They don't remember each other's names. They don't recall how they arrived there. But the familiarity is absolute, like finding a scar in the same place on 2 different bodies. Across these testimonies, the same anomalies repeat like coordinates on an invisible map. A clock on the wall, its face pale and bare, no hands to mark the hours, yet the tick of time still audible in the bones. The smell of burnt honey, so faint you can almost convince yourself you imagined it, until you taste bitterness in the back of your throat. And beneath it all, a static that seems to hum directly into the nerves, as though a distant radio is tuned to a station you were never meant to hear. Researchers tracking Whishdom patterns say these episodes arrive in clusters, not randomly. They spike when enough people remember the same impossible thing at the same time, as though the act of collective recognition summons it. One psychologist described it as a signal waiting for enough receivers to turn on at once. Another was less careful with her words. She wrote that the memories feel like bait. And so the bleed spreads, carried not by contact but by knowing. The moment you picture the room, the child, the wrong-colored eyes, it's already there, waiting for you to remember something that never happened until it feels like the only thing that ever did. It begins with a date you were never supposed to hear, a set of numbers that arrive uninvited in dreams, scribbled on receipts you don't remember writing, whispered in static between songs on a midnight radio. The numbers come with a place, a hollowed field at the edge of nowhere, a shape in the earth you can't see with your eyes, only feel in the pull beneath your feet. And somehow, without meaning to, you start walking toward it. You tell yourself you're curious, but the truth is harder to admit: you're being summoned. By the time you arrive, others are already there. Some stand apart, silent, faces turned toward the dark horizon like they're listening for something beneath the wind. Others speak in fragments, reciting the date, the coordinates, as though the act of saying them out loud is part of an unfinished ritual. No one asks why they came, they just did. There's an unspoken understanding here. Something is about to be born, and we are meant to see it. In the weeks leading up to the gathering, the warnings spread online in strange, flickering patterns. Anonymous forum posts predicted the exact moment, down to the second. But when you click the links again, the messages are gone, replaced by rows of identical timestamps, the same minute and second repeated across entire threads, mirrored on servers that shouldn't even be connected. Someone, or something, is erasing the words but leaving the mark of when they existed. Like the shadow of a signal that's already moved on. Satellite data released, and quickly pulled, showed a perfect circle in the terrain around the site. Not visible to the naked eye, not measurable in elevation or soil density, but blazing faintly in thermal spectrum, like the afterimage of a fire that never burned. The pattern is consistent with nothing in nature, and yet the official explanation lists it as agricultural variation. Those who've survived earlier Whishdom events speak of the child, as though it were an intelligence choosing its witnesses. You do not find it, it finds you. And the moment you see it, you are marked. Not physically, but in the deep architecture of your life, like a word carved into the foundation of a house. They say once it knows your face, the rest of your life bends toward it in ways you can't measure until it's too late. And then there's the rumor. It circulates in whispers at the edges of these gatherings, passed from one uneasy gaze to another. People who've tried to stop the birth, whatever it is, don't just disappear. They are erased. Their absence is retroactive, surgical. Photographs in family albums lose them entirely, the space where they stood closed up as if they were never there. Government records delete without edits, the files rebalancing like water poured into a new shape. Even the memory of them becomes slippery. At first you remember their voice, their laugh, the shape of their handwriting. Then it's just a sense that someone should be there. And then, nothing. As the appointed hour approaches, the air takes on a strange density, as though the night itself is pressing down. The wind dies. Every sound sharpens, the crunch of a shoe on frost, the shallow breath of the person beside you. And then you realize, the date, the coordinates, the calling, they weren't warnings. They were invitations. This is not something happening to you. This is something that has been waiting for you longer than you have been alive. You feel the moment before it arrives. A shift in the dark, a subtle tilt in the weight of the world. Somewhere out of sight, a life begins. It will know your name before you speak it. And if the Whishdom stories are true, you will carry that knowing with you until you vanish from every place you've ever been.